All right, hello peeps. My name is Brian Nichols, and welcome to the inaugural episode of my next new content on my YouTube channel. I am dubbing this content MMA Matchmaker. Now, let me start off with, I am not a matchmaker for any kind of promotion, as well as I've never done any kind of matchmaking, but I have always been interested in matchmaking in mixed martial arts. I've caught myself thinking about matchmaking for smaller promotions, larger promotions, and what they all go through. I feel like it can be so complicated for something you think that's so simple. Just get people to fight. That's it. So with this content, basically, I have a couple things I want to talk about here. One, what I wanted to focus on is in each video, and by the way, each video I do for MMA Matchmaker, I'm hoping to do once a month, and I'm hoping to do it on a specific division. It won't always be UFC. I may do Bellator, or maybe even a completely different promotion. But for today's video, I'm going to focus on the UFC men's flyweight division. Now, why am I focusing on them first? Mostly because of all of the hype and everything around the Cejudo and TJ Dillashaw fight last month, as well as, ignore all my bells and whistles here, as well as the pending doom, possibly, of the UFC men's flyweight division. And I was interested in seeing what we could fabricate with what we have with this division before just completely scrapping it, and just having a couple fighters move up to bantamweight and then bam, being done with it. I wanted to see what else could come of it. So that's the main reasons I focus on this division. Now, what I want to talk about is the philosophy that I went through thinking about before building all this content, or excuse me, this. Basically, I have a PowerPoint slide presentation that I have with a bunch of slides that I'm going to be going over here momentarily. But what I think about when it comes to being a matchmaker in any kind of actually, let's start off with a smaller promotion. In a smaller promotion, how I think matchmaking happens is, as a matchmaker, you're just trying to get fights scheduled. If you guys are familiar with your local scene, or even if you're not, I feel like a lot of the local promotions, a lot of the fights fall through. And I think the matchmaker's job in the smaller promotions is just to get the fights made, as well as for them to follow through in the fight card. So I feel like that's almost like they're just main two objectives in the smaller promotions. For the larger promotions, for the UFCs and Bellators, I think theirs are obviously a little tougher. They have usually rankings, but I think there's this false narrative around, for example, the UFC, where the matchmakers will try to give certain fighters favorable fights because they'll be trying to get those fighters up to where they wanted to be, up near a championship title fight, maybe get them a title and bring money into the promotion, sell more tickets, blah blah blah. But I say that's a false narrative because if you think about mixed martial arts, there's so many varieties of issues that can come up with this grand plan that you come up with for, let's say, a certain fighter in the division that could just throw it right from the get-go. Think about it. Let's say, you think, okay, this fighter A that you think is going to be great, you're trying to give him 3 favorable matchups, that's what you got scheduled out for him, and they lose the very first fight. Throws it right off the rails right there. That could happen. They could lose multiple fights in a row. They could get injured. They could get injured permanently, God forbid. They could miss weight often, possibly, in the division. They could want to move up in a division. There's so many variables. They could have a controversial fight in the division. So there's so many variables when it comes to making a star, that I think for the larger promotions, I think their main goal is just constantly churning through their through their roster, and making sure we just constantly having fights and just let it organically happen. Let the fighters that are winning organically get up to that title shot, and in between, maybe there's a controversial fight. Sometimes that helps with ratings, as well as things they do outside of the UFC to help with ratings, being marketable, and I'll touch on that during my presentation. So with all that information that's kind of like all the philosophies I kind of thought of when kind of putting these slides together. So with that, in my presentation for today, what I have 3 different sections. I have the first section is I did a bunch of research on all the top 15 fighters, including the champion in the UFC men's flyweight division. And then second, I created some graphs that I want to analyze to kind of see the differences and similarities between some of the fighters in the division, as well as the last portion of the presentation being a term I'm going to coin because I haven't seen anything out there. What else you'd call it? Basically matchmaking trees. So I have a champion tree as well as a matchmaking tree. And that's all the content I have currently in this PowerPoint presentation slide I'll be going over. So with all that, now that I've kind of set the mood here, again, thanks for watching. I really do appreciate it. If you like what you see, hit the thumbs up and hit the subscribe for further content, as well as if you have any kind of questions or anything that I kind of thought of during this whole time I was developing the content for this video, let me know in the comments, or if you just want to say hi, let me know. So with further ado, let's move on to the presentation. All right, let's get into the presentation, shall we? Let me transition over to that. And let me switch this to this. Okay. Should be good to go. All right, again, this is episode 1 of MMA Matchmaker. This is about the UFC men's flyweight division, and my name is Brian Nichols. All right, so episode 1, the agenda for today. Number 1, we're going to review the gathered research. So I gathered research on the top 15 fighters in the UFC men's flyweight division, including the champion, Henry Cejudo. And I basically broke that down and made a slide for every single fighter with a bunch of information that I'll be talking about, I think, on the next slide. Number 2, analyze graphs. So I built some graphs on the research that I found for the 15 fighters. I didn't create a graph for every single detail of research that I found, but the things that I thought would be beneficial in working on section number 3, the Explore, Champion, and Matchmaking Trees, where basically I use the gathered research and graphs to determine the matchmaking and championship trees, and I'll show you that down the line as well. All right, so current rankings as of February 2nd, 2019. Now, I'll have to say this. I have been working on this presentation and this research for a little while. They actually switched up the rankings on me a little bit because of TJ. Looks like because TJ fought Cejudo, they plopped him down as number 15. But when I originally was doing the rankings, I had Matt Schnell down at spot 15. So in my presentation I have Schnell down there, but it almost isn't going to matter because he is actually taking a fight at bantamweight. We'll talk about that. But as of right now, here's our rankings. Of course, Henry Cejudo being the champion, and a bunch of notable names here in the list. Okay, gather research. So I have 11 items for every single fighter on the on my presentation for the research that I found. I'll go over them pretty quickly. Number 1, ranking for each fighter. Pretty obvious what their ranking is. Number 2, their current record as it stands. Number 3, their last fight, was it a win or loss? And as well as if it was a win, was it a quick win with maybe little to no damage, which possibly means they could have a quick turnaround. Number 4, do they have a current fight lined up, which would help with the matchmaking tree? So if we can plop their, current lined up fight into the matchmaking tree, then I'll know, a couple months down the line, we can give them another fight down the line. Number 5, current win-loss streak. So, if they've lost 3 fights in a row, if they've won 2 fights in a row, I note that. Number 6, their record for the last 5 fights in and out of the UFC. I kind of debated only making that in the UFC, but there were some fighters on the rankings that didn't even have 5 fights in the UFC. So I did in and out just to keep it 5 across the board. And I also noted what fighters they lost against in number 6 as well. Number 7, their win-loss record against the current top 5 ranked fighters, including the champion. This was something I definitely wanted to get into the presentation. Now I made it somewhat of an interesting format. So basically I think I can do a little pointer here. I do a win-loss NA. So NA is basically they didn't fight one of the fighters in the top 5 or the champion. So for the fighters, the champion and the top 5, they will always have, if you count up their numbers here, it'll always be 5 or greater, because they can't be 6, because think about it, the top 5 plus the champion, that'll be 6 fights, but they can't fight themselves. So there'll at least be 5 here, but it could be always 5 and more, because they could fight somebody more than once, of course. For everybody outside of the top 15, it'll be at least 6, because if they're down below, they have 6 chances to fight people, and then of course more than that. So, for example, in the first one I have here for somebody in the top 5, they won 1 against somebody in the top 5 plus the champ. They lost against 2, and they have not yet fought 2. For somebody outside of the top 5, so let's say rank 7, they have won against somebody in the top 5. They lost against 3 of them though, but have yet to fight 2 of them. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, number 8. How many fights in the UFC? So this was a kind of an interesting one. There's quite a scale here. We have Joseph Benavidez that just has tons of fights in the UFC. OG from the beginning of the flyweight division. Number 9, marketability. I thought this would be obviously this isn't a real good stat, but I thought it'd be something interesting to mention. The last couple items are just kind of interested items to mention here, but I think as matchmakers, even in the bigger promotions like the UFC, like I said, even though they're trying to churn through the roster to get them up to that title shot, I feel like marketability is almost what gets them over the hump when they get into that top 5. When they're looking at fighters saying, okay, who should be next for the champion? They look at fighter A and fighter B, and if fighter B, even though if they're a little lower on the totem pole, let's say they're ranked 3 and the other person's ranked 1, if rank 3 is like on fire, the fans are, screaming for the guy to get a title shot, I feel like that's going to happen, and I feel like that's part of marketability. Which also, one of the funnier stats, number 10, Twitter followers. I thought I'd go check and see how everybody's doing follower-wise on Twitter and social media. I was going to do Instagram followers, but for now I just did Twitter. And then the last one, any additional notes found that I thought would be interesting for each fighter. Okay, so let's move on to the first one we have here. I'm going to take my camera off during some parts, and I'll turn it back on so you can see all the parts here. Okay, so we have Henry Cejudo, obviously our UFC men's flyweight division champion. Current record 14-2. Obviously, his last fight was just recently against TJ Dillashaw, and like I mentioned, it was a quick finish and little damage, so it could be a quick turnaround for him. Does he have a current fight lined up? Obviously not, since he just fought. He's also actually on a 4-fight win streak, which is really good in the division. You'll see that in our graphs later. His current previous 5-fight record, he is 4-1. That one loss being Joseph Benavidez. Very interesting. His record, this is also very interesting as well. His record against the top 5. He's only beaten 1 person in the top 5. He's lost against 1, and he hasn't fought 3 of them. That one loss being Joseph Benavidez, and he hasn't fought the other 3. So, very interesting there. How many fights in the UFC? He's had 10, which is pretty good. Marketability. Everybody on Reddit likes a joke, but if you don't know, he is an Olympic gold medalist in freestyle wrestling. Unfortunately, I think he did lose his gold in a house fire though. And I think he's the only champion in the UFC that has had a champ fight, but has beaten the fighter above the weight class. okay? Because usually the champions are moving up in weight class and beating the bigger champion. That same thing happened here, except for he did not move up. He stayed there, and the bigger champ came down. I think that's the only time that's happened in the UFC, and Henry's done it. Twitter followers, he's got a pretty good amount. He's got 42,001. And then additional notes. After, of course, beating TJ Dillashaw, we're hearing him about wanting to have a rematch. I know, of course, Dillashaw would like to, run that back again at flyweight, but Cejudo's mentioned a couple times about, hey, I beat the bantamweight champion. Why don't I just move right up and fight the flyweight champion? Or excuse me, I beat the bantamweight champion in flyweight, so why can't I just go right up, beat him bantamweight, actually become a champ? I mean, how can you argue against it? But it just sucks. We all know how the champ stuff happens. You just lock up divisions. So that's what we have on Henry Cejudo. Next, ranked number 1, Jussier Formiga. Formiga is actually his nickname, but his last name is Da Silva. So Jussier, his record is 22-5. Pretty good record. His last fight was a couple months ago. It was back in, that was October of 2018, and he won against Sergio Perez. Now, I have it down, let's jump down to additional notes. While that's a great win for Formiga, unfortunately, Formiga has moved to bantamweight. So, ranking-wise, while it's a great win, Sergio's not even in the division anymore. So it just kind of sucks for Formiga. But this number 4, Formiga actually has a current fight lined up with, and I'm horrible at pronouncing his name, Deiveson Figueiredo. And I'm going to say Fig. Fig is on a hot streak. You'll see him when we get to number 4 in the ranking, and they're fighting next month, March 23rd. And Formiga is actually on a 3-fight win streak. Obviously, why he's up at rank number 1. His previous 5-fight record, same as Henry Cejudo, 4-1, but his only losses to Ray Borg. Now, what's also interesting is his record against the top 5. He hasn't beat any of them in the top 5. He lost to 3 of them and hasn't fought 2 of them. Very interesting stat. How many fights in the UFC? 12, so he's had a little more than Cejudo. Marketability. Formiga is both a black belt in judo and BJJ, and, as we all know, Brazilians love MMA and Brazilians love supporting Brazilian fighters, as well as Brazilian champions. So here's another opportunity to have another Brazilian champion. Always a good thing marketability-wise. And Twitter followers, he's right up there, 12,899. I know it's not the 40,000 that Cejudo has, but I thought that was actually pretty good for Formiga. And again, like I said, additional notes, Sergio moved to bantamweight. Okay, next, Joey B, OG. Joey B, rank number 2. He has a record of 27-5, which is amazing. And if you don't know, his 5 losses, he's only lost to Sergio Perez once. He lost to Dominic Cruz twice, and Mighty Mouse, Joseph Benavidez, or not Joseph Benavidez, Demetrius Johnson, excuse me. Those are the only fighters. He's only lost to 3 fighters out of, how many fights is that? 32 fights. Crazy. Joey B's a beast. His last fight was the same night as Henry Cejudo. Very interesting. And he beat Dustin Ortiz. Does he have a current fight lined up? Not currently, since obviously he just fought. Current win-loss streak, he has 2 wins. And previous 5-fight record, again, exact same as Cejudo and Formiga, 4-1. And Joseph B lost to Sergio Perez. But, hey, Perez isn't even in the division anymore. Now, record against top 5, I think this is the best one we've seen so far. He has 3 wins against people in the top 5. He hasn't lost to anybody in the top 5, including the champion, and has not fought 2 of them. So that's really good. How many fights in the UFC? 17. I think that's actually the most for the men flyweight division. Marketability, like I said, OG from the division. From the start, a lot of people like to say that the men's flyweight division was built for Benavidez, but because he couldn't get past Mighty Mouse, he was stuck being, number 2. And like I said, yeah, he's only lost to Mighty Mouse, Cruz, and Perez. So it's crazy. Twitter followers, I think he has the best out of everybody. He has 146,000 Twitter followers. Really good. And of course, additional notes, He's retweeting a bunch of mentions on Twitter of rematches against Cejudo. You know what Joey B's going for. If that division's sticking around, he wants that rematch against Cejudo. All right, next. Right, number 3, Ray Borg. Poor Ray Borg, man. His record 11-3, really good. His last fight has been over a year ago. A year and a couple months, a couple change. His last loss was against Mighty Mouse. That was so long ago. Current fight lined up, no. I know he's been, unfortunately, out of competition, trying to take care of his family. So I think that's one of the reasons why he's been out for so long. I think he did have a fight lined up as well, but I want to say maybe he got hurt or injured or got sick or something, or maybe it was an issue with his family, and that's why he had to pull out. But currently, no fight lined up. He is on a 1-loss fight streak, and his previous 5-fight record, he's currently sitting at 3-2. Lost Sergio Pettis again, okay, and Justin Scoggins. And his record against top 5, 1 win, 0 losses, and 4 NAs. So he's only really fought one person in the top 5. And how many fights in the UFC? Only 8. Marketability, he trains at Jackson Wink. Who all trains at Jackson Wink? We all know. John Jones, Holly Holm, Karate Hottie, Diego Sanchez. It's always a good thing to throw out there. And obviously it'd be a great feel-good story. If his, God forbid, nothing happens bad for his family and his family is doing great. And it would just be such a feel-good story if he gets up there, gets the championship, and that would be great for him. So I think that's good marketability-wise. Twitter followers, he's actually sitting at a good number, 18,000. And additional notes, when I looked at his record, he was quickly thrown into deep waters when he joined the UFC. So I can understand him getting a couple losses right from the get-go, because he fought Demetrius Johnson pretty quickly coming to the UFC. So he was thrown in pretty quick, and I also noticed he was tweeting for a fight in March. So I haven't heard about him getting a fight, but we'll talk about that later when I go through my matchmaking tree stuff here. Okay, Deiveson Figueiredo. I'm going to say Fig, so I don't keep messing his name up. He is ranked number 4. Here is the hype train right now in UFC men's flyweight division. He is a marvelous 15-0, undefeated. His last fight was August 25th, 2018, so this was, 6 months ago? So he's definitely due for a fight, which he is lined up for. So his last win was against John Moraga, and now he's moving up to fight Jussier Formiga. And again, like I said, he's on a 15 win streak. Previous 5-fight record, of course, 5-0. If you look at his record against top 5, he's only 1-0-4, so he's only beaten one person in the top 5, which would be John Moraga. I think we see him next. How many fights in the UFC? He only has 4, and he's already ranked 4th. So doing pretty well. Marketability. Obviously, undefeated is something that always sells. And again, another Brazilian. So it's another reasons for that. Same with Formiga. And I noticed he's only been a pro since 2012. So only just probably over 7 or 8 years. No, that would be 6 to 7 years. Yeah, 6 to 7 years of professional experience. Here he is in the biggest stage, ranked number 4. If he beats Formiga, in my opinion, could get a title shot. Now, Twitter followers, only 452. Very small compared to the other fighters we saw, a little higher than him. Additional notes, like I said, hype train. He is the coming. But yeah, if he could get a dominant win over Formiga, I feel like he could definitely be a title contender in the very near future. Okay, like I said, next, John Moraga, ranked number 5. He is currently 19-7. Last fight, again, against Fig. Current fight lined up, no. 1 loss. 5-fight record, 3-2. He lost to Fig and Sergio Pettis. Again, can erase that. Record against top 5. He doesn't have 1 win against the top 5. He lost against 2 of them and hasn't fought 3, so not a good record against top 5. How many fights in the UFC? 14. Looking really good there. Marketability. I know the UFC likes to go off of heritage and where fighters are from, so I saw that he had a Mexican heritage, so of course they would like to I think they've always been trying to get a lot of the Mexican fighters into the UFC and help with that for marketability-wise. And from what I've seen from John Moraga, he always brings in his fights. We call it the Derek Lewis swinging and banging. That's how Moraga fights. Twitter followers doing pretty good, sitting at 8,502. And some notes, I didn't even know. I knew he was a wrestler, but I found he was a freestyle All-American wrestler at Arizona State University. So that's John Moraga, ranked number 5. Next, Wilson Hayes, ranked number 6. I actually saw Wilson Hayes when he fought Demetrius Johnson. It was actually, I think, a UFC on Fox. It was actually here where I live in Kansas City, Missouri. Pretty crazy fight. So Wilson Hayes, ranked number 6. He is 23-9. Last fight was just a couple months ago, and he won against Ben Wynn. And unfortunately, now Ben Wynn has been released from the UFC. But yeah, so that was a good win for Wilson. Current fight lined up, no, but he's on that win streak of just one win after beating Ben. His previous fight record not looking too great, 2-3. He lost to Moraga, Henry Cejudo, and Mighty Mouse. And record against top 5, another not looking all that great. 0 wins, 3 losses, and hasn't fought 3 of them. And now, because here we are, like I said about the records against the top 5 here, here's the 6 fights like I was talking about. So he's fought 3 of them in the top 5, including the champion, and hasn't fought 3 of them. How many fights UFC? 12, pretty good number. Marketability, he's a black belt in BJJ. I feel like that's always something they like to bring up for fighters. And he also trains at Alliance MMA with good old Dominic Cruz and his team. And again, Brazilian. Twitter followers, 5,987. Honestly, I thought he'd have a lot less, so doing pretty good there. And the interesting note I found about Wilson Hayes is he's only 5'4", and he's also fought at bantamweight and featherweight. I thought that was pretty crazy. Okay, next, Alexandre Pantoja. Mr. Pantoja, I know him from The Ultimate Fighter, Season 24. He is ranked number 7, great record of 20-3. His last fight was November 17th of 2010, and he got a win. Current fight lined up, no, but his current streak is at 2 wins, so doing pretty good, moving on his way up. Previous 5-fight record, 4-1, looking good there. Only lost to Dustin Ortiz. And his record against top 5, he hasn't beaten any of them. He lost against one of them and hasn't fought 5. So I think that's okay, especially since he's sitting at rank 7. How many fights in the UFC? 5, so pretty young in the UFC. Marketability, again, Brazilian, and he's not very young, but I think he's at a point where he's still developing. He's not at his prime yet. He's only at 28. Twitter followers, he's only at about 1,500. Additional notes, like I said, he came through The Ultimate Fighter Season 24, which I think was the one between Joseph Benavidez and Henry Cejudo. And I think it was the whoever won that got a title shot against Demetrius Johnson. Okay, next, ranked number 8, Dustin Ortiz. If you may recall, Dustin Ortiz just fought Joseph Benavidez, like I mentioned above, in January, same night that Henry Cejudo fought TJ Dillashaw. His record is 19-8. Obviously, current fight lined up, no, since he just fought last month. He's on a 1-loss streak. Previous 5-fight record, 3-2. He's lost to Benavidez and Brandon Moreno. Now, Brandon Moreno, I haven't talked about him yet, but he is unranked. But he also came through season 24 with Pantoja, and he's had some great wins, but he had just 2 recent losses. So I feel like he's just on the cusp of being ranked, but he's not there yet. So, but Brandon Moreno getting a win over Dustin Ortiz, I think, is really good. So I feel like you want to watch out for Mr. Brandon Moreno. I actually mentioned him later in this presentation. Record against top 5, 1 win, 4 losses, and 2 that he didn't fight against. So here's what I was talking about. He is outside of the top 5. So he has 7 fights. The reason that is he fought Joseph Benavidez twice and lost twice, which is really unfortunate. How many fights in the UFC? 14, so doing pretty good there. Marketability. What I found was he had the fastest knockout in UFC men's flyweight history with 15 seconds. I didn't know who that was against, but he did have that out there. So that's pretty good. Twitter followers, about a little over 8,000. And additional notes, he weighs in Even just recently against Joseph Benavidez, he weighed in 123.8 pounds. So, and now that I remember, I think I want to say yesterday, the day before, there was some rumors going around by Cejudo saying that Ortiz got let go. So I had all this information already together. So since it hasn't been made official, I'm gonna assume Ortiz is still in the UFC. But if he is removed, unfortunately, if he's weighing under the limit, there's no way he could go up to bantamweight. So unfortunately, that would probably be the best thing if they need to get rid of, or if they want to do something with Ortiz, between him going to bantamweight and then let him go. That might be the best bet, unfortunately, for Ortiz. All right, rank number 9, Alex Perez. He's a good up-and-comer. He's 21-5, so great record. He's only got 4 fights in the UFC, which is why I say he's an up-and-comer. But his last loss was against Joseph Benavidez, so, and that was back in November 2018. Current fight lined up, no. 1 loss streak. Previous 5-fight record, he's 4-1, which is really great, and again, only lost to Joseph Benavidez. Record against top 5, 0 wins, 1 loss, and 5, so that's okay. How many fights UFC? 4, and markability. He actually came through Dana White Tuesday Night Contender Series. I don't think we have a fighter that's come through Contender Series yet, because I don't think it's been long enough yet that has won a title. So maybe down the line, if Perez keeps getting his experience in, he's only 26. Keep getting experience. If he gets and win, I think he'd be the first fighter with a championship for that came through Contender Series. Twitter followers, measly amount of 848. And additional notes, he's been tweeting at the UFC, and I think Dana White as well, stating he is ready for a fight. So I do have him on the matchmaking tree. All right, so that's Alex Perez. Next, Tim Elliott. Everybody loves Tim Elliott. Rank number 10. He's always an exciting fight. Whenever I see him on the card, I'm always interested in seeing him. Record 15-8. His last fight, he won against Mark De La Rosa. He fought him on December 30th, 2017. So it's been quite a while for Tim Elliott since he's been in the cage, over a year. Current fight lined up, no. And I want to mention, it's actually down in the additional notes why he hasn't fought in a while. He's actually recovering from knee surgery. But he has tweeted that he is hoping to fight in a couple months. So again, 1 fight win streak. Previous 5-fight record is 3-2. He lost to Ben Wynn, which he's not in the UFC anymore, and Demetrius Johnson, again, not in the UFC anymore. So, meh. Record against top 5, 0 wins, only 1 loss and 5. He hasn't fought, which understandable with his rank. How many fights in the UFC? He has 10. Now he has 10 because down in markability, tough 24 winner. So he was the one that got that shot against Demetrius Johnson. Of course, lost, but he fought in the UFC previously. Got in the Ultimate Fighter. He won, got back in the UFC, so he's returned to the UFC. So that'd be something markability-wise I think they could talk about as being I think they always like to talk about a champion that was also somebody that won the Ultimate Fighter. If anybody recalls, especially for this weekend, we have Calvin Gastelum, who won the Ultimate Fighter, and he's going for a title shot against Robert Whittaker. If I know Whittaker was in the Ultimate Fighter, but I don't think Whittaker won. I may be incorrect on that. I can't recall. But so that's why he had their Twitter followers. He's actually doing really good with 10,000 Twitter followers. And like I said, again, he's recovering from knee surgery, but supposedly he should be good to go in a few months. So I have him on the schedule as well. All right, only a couple fighters left here. Magomed Bibulatov, he's ranked 11, record of 14-2, doing really good here. But he actually just lost, was it this past weekend, I think? He lost a fight against Rogerio Bontorin. Mr. Bontorin is also a prospect coming up into the UFC. He and Brandon Moreno are 2 fighters I'm looking out for in the UFC men's flyweight division to possibly be ranked quite soon. Current fight lined up, no, obviously, since he just fought, and he's on a 1-loss streak, so he was 14-1. Previous 5-fight record, 13-2, so he lost to John Moraga, which, he's high up in the rankings, and Bontorin. Record against top 5, 0-1-5, of course that one being against Moraga, and he hasn't fought the other 5, so understandable with his rank. How many fights in the UFC? Only 3, and he fought Moraga. Moraga was ranked 5. Pretty interesting. Marketability. He came into the UFC undefeated, but of course he lost to Moraga and Bontorin. And when he came to the UFC, he had, again, 3 fights. He won 1 and then lost 2, so maybe a comeback story. Twitter followers, only 898, so we need to work on his social media stuff here. And additional notes, he's currently training at Mark Henry's gym in New Jersey with, of course, Frankie Edgar, Marlon Reis. Who else do we have out there? Eddie Alvarez. So, good camp. Next, rank 12, Said Nurmagomedov. And if I recall correctly, yeah, he's Khabib's cousin. I have that down here, markability. Of course, you're related to Khabib. That's going to be the markability. Record 13-1. So, really great record. Last fight, again, same date as Mr. Bibulatov before this. The thing is, his fight was actually at bantamweight. Now, I didn't see any kind of information as to whether Nurmagomedov was going to stay at bantamweight. I didn't know if this was just a one-off, so I left him in his current position because he was still ranked here even after the updates of the rankings. So we'll see what happens there. Current fight lined up, no, of course, since he just fought last weekend. Win-loss streak, 7 wins, doing really good there. If you want to just say 6 in the flyweight, and then of course 7 with the additional bantamweight bout. Previous 5-fight record, 5-0. Record against top 5. He hasn't fought any of them. How many fights in the UFC? Only 2. So, very new to the UFC. Again, Mark Billy, Mini Khabib. Twitter followers, 21. I think that's the least out of everybody. And additional notes, he is also represented by Mr. Ali. I always butcher his name, Abdelaziz. Which, of course, he represents a lot of high-profile fighters. So, we know he has good representation there. All right, next. Number 13, Ryan Benoit. Ryan Benoit has a record of 10-5. His last fight was November 18th, 2017. So he's been out for quite a while. He had a win there. Current fight lined up, no, which is very surprising with him being out that long. Current win-loss streak is at 1 win. He also has a 3-2 5-fight record of his previous 5 fights. And those 2 losses was to Brandon Moreno. Again, like I said, somebody that's not ranked yet, but definitely could be. And Ben Wynn, which, of course, again, unfortunately, Ben Wynn's not in the UFC anymore. Record against top 5, 0-0-6. So he has not fought anybody in the top 5, including the champion. How many fights in the UFC? 6. So he's definitely getting a little experience. Marketability. This is something interesting you don't see for a lot of the UFC men's flyweight division. 8 out of his 10 fights are by KO or TKO. I thought that was a very interesting stat for men's flyweight division. Twitter followers looking pretty good there. He's got 4,000, almost 4,500. And additional notes, he did have a fight planned. Oh, I put 2019. I meant to put 2018. Sorry, apologies on that. But he was going to fight in September 2018, but he had to pull out due to injury. But he did grapple at a grappling tournament just recently, Kasai Pro. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Just last weekend. I think he lost, but he is out. He is active, so he should be ready to go here soon. All right, that's Ryan Benoit. All right, Eric Shelton, ranked number 14, another tough 24 contestant. He is 12-5. Last fight, November 2018, he fought against Joseph Morales. And current fight lined up, no. 1 win streak. Previous 5-fight record, 2-3. So he lost to Alex Perez, which of course is ranked above him. Jared Brooks, which I don't think he's in the UFC anymore, and Alexandre Pantoja, who again is ranked higher than him. Records against top 5. He hasn't fought any of them. How many fights UFC? Only 5, which is I think pretty good amongst the tough 24 contestants. And he's a fighter out of the ATT gym, which of course that gym is stacked with talent. Twitter followers, he's sitting at 2,300. And additional notes, he was actually tweeting at John Moraga recently for a possible fight. And one thing that stuck out to me was he actually had an amateur record of 10-2. So overall, if you think about it, he's got 12 fights here plus 17 fights. That's 29 fights. So he actually has really good experience in mixed martial arts if you count his amateur record as well. And that same thing almost actually carries over to the final person we have in our rankings, Matt Schnell. Again, like I said, the rankings did show TJ Dillashaw is 15 in the current rankings, but when I started this, Matt Schnell was 15, so I'm going to go with that. So Mr. Schnell, sitting at a record of 12-4. He is another tough 24 alumni. His last fight was back in June of 2018, which he won, and he does have a current fight lined up. This is next month in March 9th, and he's actually having a fight against Luis Smolka, coming back and actually fighting at bantamweight. So that's the only thing with Mr. Schnell here is he's actually moving up to bantamweight and fighting Mr. Luis Mocha. So we'll see if this is a one-off for Mr. Schnell or if he's going to be coming back down to flyweight. I guess it depends how the fight goes and how he feels there. Current win-loss streak, he's at 2 wins. Previous 5-fight record 3-2. He lost to Hector Sandoval and Rob Font. Record against top 5, 0-0-6, which is understandable with his rank. How many fights in UFC? 4. Again, marketability-wise, tough 24 contestant. Also trains at ATT with Eric Shelton. And if you look at Matt Schnell's social media, which you can kind of see down here with his Twitter followers, 17,000. That is really good. And he's only ranked 15. He likes his social media. I see him working out there. Him and his significant others always posting things out on Instagram and Twitter. So he does a really good with social media, things marketability-wise outside of the cage. And additional notes, what was interesting is I didn't know this. I found on his Wikipedia page he was actually featured in a TV show called Caged, which is a MTV reality show. And also, similar to Eric Shelton had a 10-2 amateur record. Mr. Matt Schnell here had a 9-2 amateur record. So, let's transition over back to me here real quick. All right, so that is all of the research that I gathered on all the fighters. Now, let's move on to the graphs. So the graphs, what I did here is I took the research that I have here. So the number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, and number 10. So we look back all this information from here. I pulled that for every fighter and made some graphs. Now let me mention this. I'm not a data scientist. I look at a graph and a graph makes sense to me and I use it. I'll probably improve over time with my graphs the more I do this, but as of right now, what I have is what you're gonna get. I think it tells the story, but I could probably get them better. So we'll work on that. But graph-wise, we have a graph for their every fighter's current record, every fighter's last fight, and what I did there is I converted. So if they fought, let's say 6 months ago, I gave them a 6. So the higher the number, the longer since they've fought last, if that makes sense. Number 4, current fight lined up. Basically, I did a 1 if they have a fight lined up and a 0 if they do not. Current win-loss streak, obviously pretty obvious. If they've won 2 fights, they have 2. If they've lost 2 fights, they have -2. And number 10, just to throw it out there, Twitter followers. All right. Current record. This is kind of all over the place here, but it's pretty interesting to look at. Let me take my face off the graph here. So current record, of course, we have Henry Cejudo sitting over here with 14-2. Jussier Formiga, 22-5, and then Mr. Benavidez, 27-5. These records are crazy over here. But we also have Mr. Fig sitting at 15-0. So we have really good records over here. We have quite a bit more losses down here in the middle of the pack. Then we have a couple up-and-comers that only have, one loss on the record over here. But we kind of have, the middle of the pack here has not quite a few, but more losses than everybody else. And then over here is like 2 to 5 to 3. So pretty good records across the board here. A lot of wins. Next graph, last fight, like I said, in months. So we have Ray Borg being out the longest with 16 months. Again, unfortunately, having issues with his family. Plus, I think having to possibly pull out one time has unfortunately extended his time outside the cage. Even though he's still ranked pretty highly in the standings, which I'm surprised about, because I know I've seen times where fighters will be out for a little while and they'll just like slowly move down the ladder in the rankings. But Ray Borg's still way up there. Ryan Benoit, he's been out for a long time, as well as Tim Elliott. And then we kind of move down from there. And of course, these fighters down here just fought last month, so I have them set at 0. All right, next, current fight lined up. Again, if it's a 1, so obviously the blue bars, they have a fight lined up. Everybody else, from what I found in my research, none of these other guys have fight lined up currently, except for these 3. And of these 3, Formiga and Fig, they're fighting each other, and Schnell, he's fighting at bantamweight. So we really don't have much going on here currently. Next, current win-loss streak. So this is very interesting. Here we go. Fig, like I said, 15-0, so he has the biggest win-loss streak right now with 15-0. Saeed Nurmagomedov sitting here with 7, even though he moved up to bantamweight and got a win there. So we could technically say 6, like I said. And then Henry Cejudo being 3rd with 4 wins. Mr. Formiga with 3. Of course, Formiga and Fig going at it next month. Then we got Benavidez, Pantoja, and Schnell sitting at 2. And everybody's here sitting at 1. And these guys are on losing loss streaks. Borg, Moraga, Dustin Ortiz, Perez, and Bibulatov. Next, I think this is the last graph I have. Twitter followers. Mr. Benavidez is destroying everybody when it comes to the Twitter followers here. Joseph Benavidez sitting at about almost 150K. I don't know if that's because he's really good at his social media. I looked, and he does do quite a bit on there, but I don't know if it was just because he's been in the UFC for so long and he's had that UFC machine, always getting him out there, and that's why his numbers are driven up so high. But we have Henry Cejudo, almost a third of what Benavidez has. He's sitting at, I think, about 40,000. Then we have Borg next, and then Matt Schnell right behind him. Even though Matt Schnell is ranked 15, came through the Ultimate Fighters, only had a couple fights UFC, but he's 4th in rankings, Twitter followers. Kind of interesting. And then we go on down the line. Okay. Now, my favorite section, and the section that, let me switch back over to my camera here, and the section that took me a while to really kind of go through and get this all worked out the way I wanted it to work and present it. So, the 2019 champion tree. So what I did here, basically the next slide is I'm going to have a little graph that I kind of made. It's a little rough, but I think it gets to the point of basically how, if it looked like a tree diagram of what the championship, like where the title could be by the end of 2019. So my considerations, number 1, being a matchmaker. Again, I'm not trying to say, oh, I want Cejudo to just I think he's going to keep winning, and he'll be the champion at the end of 2019 going into 2020. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to see what all possibilities there could be going into 2020. So for the champion tree, I'm trying to see what it could be going into 2020, so for the whole year. So I'm only predicting possible outcomes in number 1. Number 2, the second consideration is with the matchups that I threw into the champion tree, I went off of rank and any kind of storylines. I know there's MMA fans as well as probably people that work in the MMA industry that don't care about storylines. They care about you keep winning, you get your shot. But then we have the people on the other side that love the storylines. They love the comeback stories. They love all that. That almost adds on to the experience. So I thought that'd be a little bit of what to keep in the back of my mind while I was working on the champion tree. So let me display the champion tree. Let me switch my camera off again. Okay, so here's the 2019 champion tree. Now, I should have put dates next to these. I didn't think about that. But here we have Cejudo versus Dillashaw, the first defense of the UFC men's flyweight division in 2019. Of course, we had Cejudo defending against TJ Dillashaw, and of course, Cejudo winning that. And because he won it pretty quickly and convincingly, could be quick turnaround for him. So that was the first defense. So, in my opinion, the next possibility, the next person that should be getting the next shot in the UFC men's flyweight division should be Joseph Benavidez. If you think about it, we have Formiga and Fig basically right at the top of the pile fighting next. Benavidez and Cejudo fought at the same night. It's almost like undeniable that Benavidez, who beat Cejudo last time, I don't interview fighters. I've never interviewed a fighter. But from what I hear from the media is whenever they talk to fighters, they say, what would you like to fight people they lost against? They're always wanting rematches against people they lost against. So I feel like storyline-wise, this is huge. Cejudo's last loss is Benavidez. And, since Benavidez has been the OG for men's flyweight division this whole time, he couldn't get past Mighty Mouse. But here he is. He was able to beat Cejudo previously. Now Cejudo's champ. He needs to get his shot again at that belt, as well as beating Cejudo again to become finally a UFC champion. So, and their first fight, when Cejudo lost, was back in December 2016. So this would be well over 2 years. So I know Benavidez has kind of been out a little bit on injury, but of course Cejudo's, I feel like over the past 2 years, his skills have skyrocketed, and Benavidez's skills have always been great. So this would be a great matchup for about midway through the year. I would think about maybe May or June for this title defense to happen. And when it happens, and again, I'm predicting this happens, I think this this will be a 4-win streak of Cejudo versus a 2-fight win streak for Benavidez. So that's what I think the next possibility would be. Now, again, like I said, I'm not predicting who's going to win or lose. So what I thought was after that, towards the end of 2019, maybe around September, October, we'll see the next defense of the UFC Men's Flyweight Championship. And I think between Jussier Formiga and Mr. Figueiredo, between those two, one of those two, whoever wins their fight, will be next up for a title shot in the UFC Men's Flyweight division. So between these two, if Cejudo wins, he could fight either Formiga or Fig. And if Benavidez wins, he could be fighting against Formiga or Fig. So storyline-wise and interesting stat-wise here, if Cejudo beats Benavidez and then fights Formiga, Formiga lost against Cejudo back in 2015. So we're going on almost, that'd be a little over 3 years since they fought. So I think that storyline-wise would be really interesting. And then if you pop over on this side for Formiga on this side, Formiga also lost against Benavidez. So he's lost against both of these guys that I think will be fighting next for the UFC Men's Flyweight division. And Formiga lost to Benavidez even further back, September 2013. So that'd be over 5 years in the making of a rematch if this happens. For the other fighter, Figueiredo, a.k.a. Fig is what I'm calling him. If Cejudo wins and Cejudo then fights Figueiredo, again, basically the same thing between Benavidez and Cejudo. If they fight Fig, it's a completely fresh matchup, which is great, for the division, as well as the hype train I think might be real. If Figueiredo beats Formiga, he will be on a 16-0 winning streak in the UFC Men's Flyweight division. And I know that's always a talking point when it comes to like high-level fights in the UFC. So basically, in the 2019 champion tree, what I predict at the end of 2019 going into 2020, if the division is not scrapped, let me switch over my camera. Let me go back. I think the champion could be Henry Cejudo, Joseph Benavidez, or Jussier Formiga, or Mr. Figueiredo. So that's my champion tree. Next, the 2019 matchmaking tree. So what I have here, again, considerations. Number one, again, I'm not predicting who's going to win or lose. In the beginning of the tree, and I call it a tree, but this one's not really a tree. This one's a little interesting. It's almost like I think they call it a scatter plot. Something like a scatter plot, but it's more lined up. Again, I'm not predicting wins or losses, but I scaled my calendar. You'll see in the picture from January to December. Because I'm not predicting wins or losses, since I did start with January, I did include the fights that already happened in the men's flyweight division in the beginning. So obviously Cejudo winning, Dustin Ortiz losing, Benavidez winning. So I did include them with January. So that's number one. Number two, again, I went off of rank. I also went off a win-loss streak, last fight time, and new matchups. Because this is going to include all the fighters in the top 15. And number three, what I wanted to do when I first sat down and tried to figure this out, I wanted to schedule out the whole year of what I thought the whole year could look like. But after looking at it, if I wanted to schedule out the whole year, I would have to predict win or losses. Because if I have somebody fight, I actually have it up on my board. On the presentation, I have a picture that I took. But I had some fights in May that I listed could happen. And then for those fighters to fight again in, let's say, August or September, I'd have to know who won or lost that in order to kind of, continue that tree. So what I did was, instead of doing the entire year, I only did 3 months. I think maybe doing a quarter, sitting down every quarter, I feel like would definitely be doable. So that's what I did in this situation, is I only scheduled out the next 3 months. And for number 4, in those 3 months, I made sure to at least get one fight for each of the ranked fighters on the tree. So without further ado, let's move on to the last slide in my presentation, the actual matchmaking tree. Now, again, like I said, I'm not a data scientist. I tried to do this online. I tried to find some software that I could do it on, but I couldn't. So I did it by hand. I have a whiteboard next to me that I like to use. I like to come up with things and draw things and write up ideas. And that's what I did here. Basically, I kind of scatter plotted out what I thought could happen over the next 3 months. It might be a little hard to see, but I'll use my pointer here to point out what you can see here. I won't move my mouse so this will go away, but if you look, can I move this? Let's see. No, I can't. So I have legend down here. I'll stop moving my mouse so you can see what the legend says. So basically I have the orange is championship fights, so they're at the top over on that side. The bar going way across at the top. Blues are wins, so you're going to see those on this side. I think you only see one here and one here, so those are already wins in the UFC men's flyweight division. Actually, put an asterisk next to that. A black is a loss. Purple is upcoming, so those are the ones that I'm predicting could happen in the matchmaking tree. You'll also see the OOD section, which I have down here, which is out of division. So that's fights that fighters either have planned or have had outside the division of the men's flyweight division. And the last one's a little cut off down here at the bottom, but you can see a little star. And what that means is up and comer. I threw a little up and comer on my matchmaking tree here. So a little hard to see. So looking at my axis here, the x-axis, like I said, is the date by the month. So I went from January to December, but I only really did the next 3 months ahead of February. And then the y-axis, I have the rankings. So I have the champion section up here. I have rankings 1 through 5 here, rankings 6 through 10 in this section, 11 through 15 here, and again, out of division down here. So, champions. I already kind of went over the champion tree, so I'll go over this section quickly because this part is already planned out through the full year. We have, of course, Cejudo win in January. Moving right along. I thought about maybe around May, maybe 4 months later, we could have Cejudo and Benavidez. And then another 4 months after that, around September, we could have the 4 possibilities there, like I mentioned before. So I have those up here. And, of course, that leads into 2020. And looking at January, again, through rank 6 through 10, Dustin Ortiz fought and lost. And then up rank through 1 through 5, we had Benavidez win. Of course, they fought each other, and that was the outcome. And then in this month of February, we had Nurmagomedov. He went and fought in bantamweight, and he won. So I put that in the out-of-division section. And then I have Bibulatov, who lost. I think he was ranked 11 here, and he lost a fight. And he actually lost a fight against Mr. Rogerio Bontorin. Looking at him, I'm really surprised he's not ranked yet. He is 15-1, so he's another up-and-comer to keep an eye out as well. So that's what we had that happened up to this point. Everything else after this in the matchmaking tree to the right, march on, is what I think could be possible matchups in the UFC men's flyweight division. First, actually, let me correct myself. March is actually already scheduled. So we have Matt Schnell. He's fighting up at bantamweight. He's fighting Louis Mocha, like I said. But at the top of the list, right here, Formiga and Figueiredo, Mr. Fig, they're fighting, and they're up. Formiga's ranked 1, and I think Figueiredo's number 4. So they're fighting. So that's why I thought, even though there's a little extra time until here, but I think definitely whoever wins this should get the next title shot. All right, so April, May, June, and on is what I think is what I basically am predicting could happen matchmaking-wise. So let me bring up my notes real quick, because I did take some notes on these. Okay, so April, we have Tim Elliott could be taking on Ryan Benoit. I have them scheduled down here. Elliott ranked number 10, and Benoit ranked 13, so pretty close in ranking. They're both on a 1-fight win streak, and they've also been out for, I think they were out for the most months out of all the fighters. So, which kind of works out. They've both been out the same amount of time. They're both similar in the rankings. They both have 1-fight win streak, and it's a fresh matchup. So, to me, it's a no-brainer to match them up. So, I had them match up in April. And then up here, further on the list, like I said, Ray Borg has been out for quite a long time as well. Ray Borg is right up there with Elliott and Benoit. But looking at Borg, he could possibly fight John Moraga. Borg is ranked 3 and Moraga is ranked 5. Now, they're both on a 1-loss streak, so it kind of makes sense there. Unfortunately, Borg would be out for 15 or 17 months altogether by the time April comes along. But Moraga would be out for about 7 months, so over half a year. And again, they're close in rankings, and again, another fresh matchup, so it just kind of makes sense there. All right, so that's what I could fill in for April. Moving on to May. Basically, we had the fighters down like at the bottom of the in April, at the bottom of the rankings, and then near the top of the rankings. And then May is just like a glob of all the fighters right in the middle of 6 through 10. So first we have Wilson Reis taking on Alexandre Pantoja. We have them Reis right here and Pantoja right here. So Reis is 1-win streak, and Pantoja's on a 2-win streak, so they're both on wins there. They've both been out for 5 months by this time. They're both close in rank, of course, rank 6, rank 7. And again, fresh matchup, so it just makes sense, you know. And then the other matchup I put here, since Dustin Ortiz lost back in January, give him a couple months off, and he could have another fight. So Dustin Ortiz versus Alex Perez is the other fight I put here in May. And both Ortiz and Perez will be on a 1-fight loss streak. Ortiz will be out for 3 months over to here, and then Perez will be out for about 5 months. So he fought a little before, right at the tail end of 2018. And they're both close in rank, of course, right here, ranked 8 and 9. And again, fresh matchup. So to me, it just makes sense. All these were fresh matchups. It just made that much easier. And then the last fight I had scheduled here, since Mr. Bibulatov lost back in February, I thought we could give him one more fight. So I gave him a fight over here. Again, he's ranked number 11. Now, I moved him down on the ranking here only because when he lost to a fighter that wasn't even ranked. So I feel like he could probably go down a couple places. So then that could give a fighter, again down here, up-and-comer, a shot at him, which is Mr. Brandon Moreno. So I put Mr. Moreno down here, again, not ranked, fighting Bibulatov in June. So with that, we have April, May, and June. That's the 3 months that I planned out ahead of March of what I think could happen in the future if the UFC men's flyweight division is kept around by the UFC. So with all that, let's move on to my closing statement. All right, so with all that information, in my opinion, I think it is worth keeping around the flyweight division. Think about it. Just at the kickoff of the year, ESPN, we're finally on ESPN, and we had a great yet controversial fight in the UFC men's flyweight division for the championship. Now that we got a little bit of hype, a little bit of talk about the flyweight division, UFC's gonna be like, nah, get rid of it. Like, I feel like give it a little more time, you know. If Cejudo wants to stick around, he could have that rematch of Benavidez. I feel like that would be such a great fight. And then also possibly fighting Figueiredo, who's going to be, if he would be 16-0 at that point, or fighting Formiga and showing that while Formiga has obviously been getting better, so hasn't Cejudo. There's so many possibilities in the champion tree that I created that I feel like that would keep it interesting. Now, I don't think it'll bring in the money like, you know, a John Jones or Conor McGregor, but it's a worthy division. I in my opinion, I think I'd keep around. And also we have the up-and-comers coming up, like I was talking about, the Rogerio Bontorin, as well as Brandon Moreno, and we also have Ray Borg, who could be a great comeback story, and Khabib's nephew, cousin, whichever he was, I forget. So we have a bunch of great fighters, and I don't think a lot of these fighters will be able to move up to bantamweight. Like I said with who was it? Was it Dustin Ortiz? You know, weighing in well below the limit. So it would be hard. Basically, I feel like a lot of these fighters would be let go. Of course, with possibly Dustin Ortiz already being let go. So, in my opinion, I think keep the division around for a little while more. See if we can get a little more hype going. And I think with my predictions and my matchmaking tree, I think these would be the good fights to make, the good calls to make. So I know I'll be keeping an eye out and an ear out if they, of course, keep the division. If these will be the fights they'll make, that would be pretty cool. So with that, if you've stuck around this long, I really appreciate your watching. I think I'm over an hour. This will be my longest video so far on my YouTube channel, but I had so much content I wanted to get into this. Hopefully down the line I can work on maybe making this a little slimmer. Maybe I won't go over the entire 15-man roster for the top 15 ranking division. Maybe I'll just go over the main information that I found instead of going every single thing. But anyways, if you really do like this, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe. Let me know in the comments down below what you think as well. What other content do I have coming up? Oh, I have the preview for the UFC event pay-per-view going on this weekend. What pay-per-view is that? Is it 224? No, 234. That's going on this weekend between Whitaker and Gastelum. I'm doing a event preview for that, and that should be uploaded here momentarily as well because I'm doing 2 videos at once. So again, thanks again, and if I don't catch you before, enjoy the fights.